After my husband died, his family kicked me out of the house, and that was their biggest mistake. The morning the lock wouldn't turn, I was still wearing the same sweater I'd had on when Liam took his final breath. My name is Amelia Gray. I'm 37 years old, and, up until last week, I was a lighting designer who believed in subtle glow, silent work, and the kind of warmth that didn't need to be announced. Liam and I had built a quiet life together in Boulder, Colorado, far from the loud skyline of the cities we used to dream about. We had no kids, by choice, no grand vacations, no Instagram milestones, just a small stone house tucked at the base of the hills, a dog-eared garden journal on the kitchen counter, and an unfinished mosaic lamp we kept promising to complete when life slowed down. I didn't know that when would never come. Liam collapsed on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday night, I was alone in the waiting room of Boulder General, listening to monitors go silent. On Friday, I signed the paperwork. By Sunday morning, I was staring at the front door of our home, key in hand, expecting grief but instead finding resistance. The key didn't turn. Not on the first try, not on the second. I tried the spare I always kept in my boot, but the result was the same. Then I noticed the curtains had changed. The soft gray ones I picked from a street vendor in Lisbon were gone, replaced by thick navy fabric that didn't suit the light in that room. My breath hitched. I walked around to the back, hoping I'd lost my mind from the lack of sleep, but the back entrance had a new lock, too. One of those high-tech ones you control from an app. Liam hated them. I backed away slowly, trying not to cry in a neighborhood where everyone knew our names. Then I heard it laughter, muffled but unmistakably familiar. I crept around to the front window, careful not to make noise on the gravel path, and peeked through the small gap in the curtain. There she was, Marianne Gray, my mother-in-law, wearing her signature burgundy wool, perched on our velvet couch like a queen inspecting her territory. Sitting beside her was Clara, Liam's sister, pouring orange juice into the glass Liam always used for his whiskey. They were relaxed, chatting about floral arrangements, placing framed photos on the mantel like they'd always belonged there. Not one of the photos included me. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, ignoring the sting in my knuckles and the dizziness creeping in from 2 nights of no sleep. When the door finally creaked open, Marianne didn't look surprised. She just stood there with that calm, composed smile, the kind that has no softness behind it. "Amelia," she said, her voice light. "We weren't expecting you so soon. I asked why my key didn't work." She sighed. "Because, darling, this isn't your house anymore." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe my brain couldn't process the words right away. I asked again, slower this time, and she didn't flinch. "Liam paid for this home, and now that he's gone, it belongs to us, his real family. You didn't have children, you didn't contribute financially, and without a will, well, things revert naturally." Clara appeared behind her, holding one of my terracotta bowls with a smug smile that made my spine go cold. "You left the side door open when you rushed to the hospital," she said. "We just assumed you wouldn't mind." I didn't cry. Not then. I wanted to, but the tears didn't come. I stood there, frozen, hearing them talk like I was an ex-tenant, not the person who had wiped blood from Liam's mouth when his body gave up. I whispered, "I'm his wife." Marianne tilted her head. "Not legally. Not without a will to confirm your stake. Love doesn't come with deeds." "Amelia." That was the moment something shifted. A silence deeper than grief, colder than winter air, settled into my chest. I looked past her shoulder, at the living room I'd helped design, the bookshelf I'd built with my own hands, and the lamp Liam never finished. I stepped back, nodded slowly, and said only one sentence. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." Her smile cracked just slightly, but I didn't stay to watch it unravel. I turned and walked back to my car. Not because I was ready to give up, but because I remembered something Marianne didn't know. Something Liam once whispered on the porch 2 years ago when we thought we'd lose the house. something I had quietly fixed before he even asked. The locks might not remember me, but the paperwork would. The night after they locked me out, I checked into a roadside motel just off Highway 93. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach and lemon, the kind of artificial freshness that makes you feel even lonelier. I didn't cry. I didn't eat. I sat on the edge of the bed with the same overnight bag I had taken to the hospital, still zipped, untouched. Inside were only two things that mattered: a wrinkled folder of bank statements and a printed refinancing document from 18 months ago, with my name, not Liam's, on the title. It wasn't a secret. Not exactly. Just something I had never made a big deal about. When Liam's startup nearly folded and his credit collapsed, I quietly took the mortgage into my name. I had been saving for a decade since quitting my full-time job. I used that fund to keep us afloat without ever saying the words out loud. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. We loved each other in a way that didn't require announcements. That winter, I called our credit union while Liam was asleep on the couch. I moved money, signed documents, submitted my freelance contracts to prove income, and spent hours on the phone with underwriters while pretending I was shopping for curtains. By the time Liam recovered from the crisis, the house had been safe again. He just never asked how, and I never told him that every monthly payment had come from me since that February. It wasn't about pride, it was about peace. He needed to heal, and I needed him to breathe. That was enough. Until now. I reread the refinancing document twice that night, letting my finger run over the embossed seal. I had signed it in the branch on Maple Street. Alone, without witnesses except the notary who complimented my calm under pressure. I remembered the way I tucked the final copy into a drawer in Liam's home office, wedged behind his tax folders. Just in case. Mary Ann didn't know that. She never set foot in that office. She used to say it was full of wires and ego. Clara didn't know either. She spent every visit pretending Boulder was temporary, a phase Liam would outgrow once he came back to Denver to take over the family business. They had both underestimated me. Not because I was weak, but because I had learned to stay quiet. I had spent so many years managing moods, de-escalating conflict, and making space for people who only entered the room when it was convenient. But this time, there was no space left for them. The next morning, I drove to the house, not to knock, not to plead, just to look. It was early. The air was sharp, heavy with pine and melting frost. Mary Ann's Lexus wasn't in the driveway, which meant she'd gone back to the city for her weekly board meeting. Clara never woke before 9. I parked 2 houses down and walked along the back alley, the same one Liam and I used to sneak through during summer storms when we wanted to skip dinner and just sit in the garden under the canopy. The side gate creaked, just like always. The latch was loose. Liam meant to fix it for months. He never did. I slipped through the laundry room and held my breath. The house smelled different. Not terrible, just wrong. Lavender and some overly sweet vanilla plug-in had replaced the rosemary diffuser I used. The photos in the hallway were gone. The hallway itself had been painted a strange beige that made the light fixtures look cheap. I didn't let myself grieve. I moved quickly, heading straight to the office. It was untouched, the only room they hadn't rearranged. Probably because they didn't care. That was their mistake. I found the drawer exactly where I left it. I pulled out the refinancing folder, the original documents with official stamps and digital signatures. Dated and verified. It included the property deed, updated under my name alone, notarized at the city registrar. It wasn't just paperwork. It was proof. Legal. Uncontestable. Time-stamped proof that this house was never Liam's alone. That no matter how loudly Mary Ann spoke, or how often Clara repeated her version of the story, the truth had already been written, and I wasn't going to let them erase it. As I stood there, folder in hand, I caught my reflection in the office window. I didn't look like someone in mourning. I looked like someone remembering who she was before all the noise began. When I walked out the back door again, I didn't rush. I locked the gate behind me and walked toward my car like I had nothing to hide, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't. It was 2 days after I retrieved the refinancing documents when they came knocking. Not at my house, but at the motel where I was staying. The sun hadn't yet crested the mountain line, and I had just made my first cup of coffee in the tiny microwave by the sink. I heard the knock before I even got to sip it 3 sharp raps, spaced evenly. The kind of knock that tells you whoever's on the other side expects you to answer quickly. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw Mary Ann Gray standing on the walkway, flanked by a man in a gray suit holding a leather folder. She was dressed in black, a high-neck coat with pearl buttons, sunglasses perched too deliberately on her head for a woman not crying. I didn't open the door. I stepped outside instead, closing the motel door gently behind me, my own folder tucked under one arm, zipped to the top. The cold morning air stung a little, but I didn't shiver. I had stopped shivering the moment they stole the house. Mary Ann smiled tightly. "This is Mr. Daniel Schaefer," she said. "He's here to help mediate a fair solution." I let her finish the sentence without reacting. She went on, her tone smooth. "Since there's no will, we're all navigating uncertainty, but Liam would have wanted fairness." I didn't say anything. She mistook the silence as hesitation. "Mr. Schaefer, the attorney," cleared his throat. "Miss Gray, we're aware of your personal connection to the home, but our understanding is that ownership is disputed." I held his gaze and responded quietly. "It's not disputed. It's documented." I reached into my folder, pulled out a copy of the notarized deed with my name on it, and held it in the space between us. "This is legal. This house was refinanced under my name. All payments were made from my account for 18 months. Mary Ann's smile faltered. Just a flicker. "But you weren't working," she said, trying to sound puzzled. "Liam told me you had left your job." I nodded. I had. But freelance work still pays. Even when no one's watching, I built the income, I made the payments, and I signed every line. The lawyer extended a hand. "May I review the documents?" I shook my head. "My attorney will send official copies. Until then, you have no business near that property." Mary Ann narrowed her eyes. "You really think this will hold up in court?" I stared back at her. "I don't think—" "I know, and if you'd like to test it, I welcome the challenge." For a moment, no one spoke. A wind moved between us, stirring the dried leaves in the parking lot, brushing past the collar of her coat like it. Two. Wanted to leave. Then, almost too low to hear, Mary Ann said, "You were never part of this family." I let the words sit there, then replied, "And you never tried to be part of mine." I turned, walked back into my motel room, and locked the door with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Outside, I heard footsteps retreating, not rushed, but not confident either. That evening, I sat with my laptop on the motel bed and called Alex Ortega. We hadn't spoken in years. We went to design school together, shared cheap wine and critiques at midnight, and once dreamed of opening a design firm before life split us in different directions. He'd gone into law after a work injury derailed his creative path. I heard he specialized in real estate and probate cases. When he answered, I only had to say my name. "Amelia," he said, no question in his voice. "How bad is it I told him everything?" He listened, not like a lawyer, like a friend. Then he asked one question. "Do you want to settle or stand your ground?" I didn't hesitate. "I want to hold the line." We set up a meeting. He asked for the refinancing paperwork, payment records, emails, anything that could verify the timeline. I had all of it, saved in a cloud folder, meticulously labeled not because I foresaw this fight, but because design work trains you to organize every pixel of your life. I emailed the files while he was still on the call. He promised to start the filings in the morning. That night, I slept for 4 hours straight, the longest stretch I'd managed since Liam's death. It didn't mean I wasn't grieving. It just meant I'd stopped letting them write the ending for me. 4 days after our motel parking lot conversation, I received the court summons. It was tucked in a manila envelope, slid under my door sometime between breakfast and the email confirming our preliminary hearing. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for 10 full minutes, fingers resting on the seal, heart steady but eyes dry. I already knew what was inside. Marianne and Clara had filed a formal challenge, accusing me of manipulating Liam during his final months and using undue influence to transfer property into my name. The words in the packet were cold and deliberate. They called me opportunistic. They framed their concern around family legacy and emotional vulnerability. They even included an affidavit suggesting Liam had been mentally compromised in the final months of his life. I didn't need to read further to know what they were trying to do. It wasn't about the house. It was about power. They couldn't accept that he had trusted me more than he had trusted them. So now, they would try to destroy the only thing left of us to prove he'd been wrong. I called Alex that afternoon. He wasn't surprised. They filed under probate dispute, he said, scanning the documents I forwarded. They're using grief as strategy. His voice was calm, but clipped. They're building a story around confusion, memory lapses, anything that makes it seem like Liam didn't know what he was doing when he signed that deed. I asked if it would work. He didn't lie. Judges are cautious in death disputes. Amelia, especially when no will is involved. But if we can establish mental clarity, consistent financial decisions, and independent consent, we can hold the line. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. I didn't tell him what I remembered that might help. Not yet, not until I was sure I could find it. 3 months before Liam died, he came home late from a meeting and sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes without saying a word. He didn't touch the dinner I made. He didn't look at me directly. Finally. He muttered something about forgetting where he parked, how long it took to remember the name of the client he'd just seen. At the time. I chalked it up to exhaustion. His company was merging with a larger firm, and the stress had changed the way he carried his body. He said he was fine, just sleep-deprived, but then, 2 days later, he mentioned a neurology appointment, just to rule stuff out. He said casually. I hadn't gone with him. He asked me not to. I hadn't thought about that day in weeks. But now, standing in a motel room surrounded by court threats, it returned like a spotlight cutting through fog. I tore through my suitcase, then my car, then the banker's box of old documents I'd thrown in when they locked me out. Nothing. I couldn't find it. But I remembered the name St. Mary's Neurological Clinic. I called. The receptionist said the report was mailed to the house 3 weeks after the appointment. Only 1 copy was sent. She said, confidentially addressed to Mr. Hazdar Gray. I hung up and stared at the floor, my mind racing. If they hadn't touched that envelope, it might still be there. If they had, and thrown it out. I had nothing. But if I found it, it would change everything. It would bury their accusation before it could be spoken in court. I waited until Saturday morning, when the house was most likely empty. Marianne spent Saturdays in Denver hosting her book club, and Clara volunteered at a community theater across town. I drove past the house slowly, watching for signs of life. The driveway was empty. The blinds upstairs were open but still. I parked 3 blocks away, hooded my coat, and cut through the side alley. The gate creaked again, like it was waiting for me. I entered the house the same way I had last time through the laundry room, past the kitchen that no longer smelled like cinnamon and cardamom, into the hallway where my framed photos had once lived. The office door was shut, but not locked. I stepped inside and closed it behind me, flipping on the desk lamp like I had so many times before. The desk was tidier than I remembered, probably rearranged by Clara, who never understood the value of organized chaos. I opened every drawer, flipped every folder, scanned every file. Nothing. No envelope, no clinic letter. I was about to give up when I noticed an old shipping box beneath the printer, filled with unopened mail and random catalogs. I sifted through them quickly, half panicked, half numb. And then I saw it. A white envelope, slightly bent at the corner, addressed to Liam Gray, sealed with the green logo of St. Mary's Neurology. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. The letter was dated 2.5 months before he died. It read clearly, in standard medical language, that no cognitive impairment had been observed. The results were normal, no signs of memory loss, disorientation, or neurological concern. He was of sound mind. My breath caught, sharp and real. I took a photo, then another. Then I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my folder. I didn't feel victory, not yet, but I felt steadier. That night, back at the motel, I emailed the scans to Alex. His reply came in 6 minutes. "We've got them. Get some sleep." By the time the hearing date arrived, I had memorized every line of that medical letter. I knew the phrasing, the tone, the spacing of the words that confirmed Liam's mental clarity. It didn't erase the pain of losing him, but it dismantled the story they tried to tell. The courthouse in downtown Boulder was smaller than I imagined, lined with stone columns and hushed foot traffic that echoed across the marble floors. Alex met me on the courthouse steps. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie, his hand steady on the folder we had built over weeks of preparation. He didn't ask how I felt. He just said, "Are you ready to tell your side?" I nodded, more certain than I'd been about anything since the morning the key refused to turn. Inside the courtroom, Mary Ann and Clara sat shoulder to shoulder, both dressed in black as if mourning gave them moral authority. Mary Ann clutched a lace handkerchief that she barely used, except when the judge glanced in her direction. Clara avoided my gaze entirely, her hands folded too neatly in her lap, eyes cast downward like she was performing a daughter-in-law's grief. Their attorney, Schaefer, started with what I expected a speech about family legacy, vulnerability, and concern for Liam's well-being. He spoke about questionable decisions made during emotional hardship and documents that may have been signed under duress. The words came in soft waves, gentle enough to sound reasonable, but sharp enough to leave cuts if left unchallenged. When it was our turn, Alex stood calmly. He didn't argue. He didn't match their performance. He walked the judge through our documents one by one. The mortgage refinance, signed and notarized over a year before Liam's death. The property title, updated and registered solely in my name. The payment records, all drawn from my personal account. And then, finally, the neurological letter. He read the section about no signs of impairment, and the courtroom fell silent. He handed the judge a copy. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the page, and looked directly at Schaefer. "Do you have any medical documentation to support your claim of diminished capacity?" she asked. His response was weak, only observations from family members. The judge set the letter down slowly. Then I see no admissible basis to question the document's validity. Mary Ann shifted in her seat. Clara looked up for the first time, but I didn't watch them. I kept my eyes on the judge, my hands in my lap, my breath measured. She continued writing, then said without hesitation, "The house belongs to Mrs. Gray. The property transfer is legal and binding. This matter is resolved. Case dismissed." The gavel didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like closure. Not the celebratory kind, the quiet kind that lets your shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. I didn't turn to see their faces. I stood, gathered my coat, and walked out of the courtroom beside Alex, who simply said, "You did good." Outside, the sky had shifted. The snow from earlier in the week had melted into crisp sunlight. The kind that only appears after the cold has already done its damage. I breathed it in slowly. Across the street, Clara stood near a parked car, arms folded, face pale. She didn't approach, but Mary Ann did. She crossed the pavement like it still belonged to her, heels clicking like punctuation marks. "You may have won the house," she said coldly, "but you'll never be one of us. You stole my son." I looked at her, no longer afraid of what she might say next. "I didn't steal him," I replied. I stood beside him. "You're the one who couldn't." Her face cracked for just a moment. Then Clara touched her arm, muttered something too low to hear, and they both turned back toward the car. I watched them leave, not with anger, but with finality. They hadn't just lost the house, they had lost control of the narrative. That night, back at the motel, I packed for the last time. I didn't fold my clothes with urgency. I didn't check my phone for threats. I just moved slowly, deliberately, as if my body finally understood it was safe. before I zipped my suitcase shut. I slid Liam's neurological report into the back of a folder marked Keep, not as a weapon, not even as protection, just as a reminder that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes. It waits quietly for the right moment, and when it speaks, it doesn't need permission. The service was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late March, the kind of day when spring sunlight pretends to be warm but still carries the sharpness of winter underneath. Liam had wanted something simple. No speeches, no slideshow, just music. His favorite coffee blend at the back, and a quiet corner where people could leave a note if they didn't know what to say out loud. I had arranged everything myself, not because I wanted control, but because no one else had the right. The chapel wasn't grand, just a small space with arched windows and polished wood. Tucked behind a nursery garden Liam used to visit when he wanted to forget the pressure of performance and remember the smell of soil. People began to arrive early. His old college roommate flew in from Portland. A couple of former clients from their lighting startup hugged me like I was still part of something. One woman I didn't know handed me a Polaroid of Liam fixing a garden lamp for her father's retirement party. She said, "He told us once that you were the reason he stayed hopeful." I didn't have words for that. So I just nodded, placed the photo near the urn, and whispered a quiet thank you when she walked away. By 10:45, the room was nearly full. I was in the front row, hands folded over my lap, trying to slow my breath and focus on the soft piano tuning in the background. That's when I saw them. Marianne and Clara entered through the back, both dressed in coordinated black. Veils, subtle but clearly intentional. They hadn't been on the guest list. I had removed their names the morning after the court ruling, and the funeral home had confirmed security would screen for them. But somehow they had gotten in. Maybe someone had turned a blind eye. Maybe they simply walked in like they still belonged. They slipped into the last pew. Eyes forward, chins high. No apology, no hesitation. Just presence. Like showing up could undo what had already happened. I stood slowly, not rushed, not theatrical, just steady. My heels tapped gently against the hardwood as I turned toward the back. People fell silent. Even the music faded, as if someone unseen had lowered the volume instinctively. I walked the center aisle until I reached the last row, and then I spoke calm, quiet, not angry, just exact. "You're not welcome here." Marianne opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. "You tried to erase me," I said. "In life and in court. You changed the locks on my door before his body was even cold. And now you sit here in veils like grief gives you permission." Clara's eyes dropped again. Marianne stood her ground. "I carried him," she whispered. "I brought him into this world. I didn't blink, and I carried him out." I replied, through hospice, through fear, through silence. There was a beat of quiet so full, it sounded like memory. I took a slow breath and added, "You mourn in your way, but not in this room, not near his name." Marianne didn't move, but Clara did. She touched her mother's sleeve and said, almost too soft to catch, "Let's go." Marianne stiffened, her lips parted like she might argue, but then she looked at me. Really looked. Not as an obstacle or a rival, just as the woman her son had chosen. And for the first time since the night I saw her sipping tea in my living room, she turned away. They walked out together, heels echoing louder than any words they could have said. I returned to my seat as the music picked back up. No one clapped. No one whispered. They just exhaled. The minister stepped to the front again, voice gentle, hands steady, and began the service. I listened, not as a widow trying to survive, but as a woman who had already outlived the worst of it. When the urn was carried to the garden behind the chapel, I walked behind it with a quiet strength I didn't know I had. We buried him beneath the flowering dogwood he had once stopped to photograph in spring. I placed the Polaroid there, not for him, for me, for the version of me who stayed quiet too long. The house felt different after the funeral, not because anything changed physically, but because the tension had shifted. It no longer sat in the air like something waiting to explode. Instead, It lingered like a shadow trying to find a new place to settle. I moved back in quietly, without fanfare or announcement. The rooms still carried traces of them, lavender diffusers I hadn't thrown out yet, a scratch on the kitchen counter from a pan Clara had mishandled, and one of Marianne's silk scarves draped over the back of a chair like a forgotten flag from a lost war. I didn't rush to erase those signs. I didn't rush at all. I unpacked slowly, like someone testing the floor beneath her feet before trusting it again. I stood in the entryway longer than necessary. I brewed coffee and let it go cold. I walked past the bedroom without entering, too careful to disturb the silence that now felt like mine. On the third morning, I saw her, Marianne. She was parked across the street in the same silver sedan she always drove, engine off, window cracked, cigarette smoke curling faintly into the air. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the house like it might confess something she missed. I stood behind the curtain for a few minutes, not hiding but also not ready. Then I picked up my coffee, walked out onto the front porch barefoot, and stood facing her with the mug warm in my hands. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. She flicked her cigarette out the window, turned the key, and drove off slowly without making eye contact. That became her ritual for 3 days in a row. Same time, same posture, same silence. Like she couldn't accept that she had lost, not just legally, but symbolically. I didn't call Alex. I didn't take photos for evidence. I didn't start a journal to document what felt like subtle intimidation. I didn't need to. Her power only worked when I feared her, and I had run out of fear. On the fourth day, she didn't come, and something in me relaxed for the first time in weeks, like a violin string that had finally been loosened just enough not to snap. I took that afternoon to clean the office properly. I went drawer by drawer, deciding what stayed and what could go. I kept Liam's journals, the ones filled with lighting concepts and post-it notes that said things like, "Ask Amelia about color warmth," even when the notes were never followed up. I kept his fountain pen and his cracked leather sketchbook, but I threw away the paperweights, the corporate holiday cards, and the stack of promotional mail from companies he never cared about. I opened the windows and let the March air inside, just enough to carry out the scent of dust and past lives. That night, I found the gardening notebook. It was tucked between a tax binder and an old laptop that hadn't been used in 2 years. The cover was worn soft, the pages uneven, filled with hand-drawn sketches of raised beds, climbing roses, and small scribbled dreams about soil depth and seed rotation. I flipped through it slowly, stopping at a page where he had taped down a seed packet. Marigolds, beneath it, in his neat handwriting, were the words, "One day, when you're ready." I don't know how long I stared at that page, maybe minutes, maybe longer. But when I finally looked up, I walked straight to the hallway closet, grabbed my old gardening gloves, and headed outside. The soil was still stiff from winter, but it yielded under pressure. I worked in silence, not out of sadness, but out of intention. I dug the holes gently, planted every seed, and watered them with a stillness I hadn't felt since before Liam fell ill. When I sat on the back steps afterward, fingers muddy, knees aching, I didn't feel heroic. I just felt real, present, like a person who had lived through a fire and still remembered how to grow things. And when I walked back inside, I saw an envelope tucked under the front door. Plain. No handwriting. Just one sheet of paper inside with 6 bold words printed in block font. "This house will always be mine." No signature. No return address. No doubt about who had sent it. I stared at it for a long moment, then laughed. Not bitterly, not with malice, just a quiet laugh, like someone breathing out a lie they'd carried too long. I folded the note once, walked to the backyard, and buried it under the first row of marigold seeds. Not for revenge, for release. The morning the marigolds sprouted, I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters with a damp cloth that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and rosemary. I wasn't expecting anything remarkable. It was early spring, and Boulder mornings were still sharp enough to fog the windows slightly. But when I stepped out onto the back porch with my coffee and looked toward the garden beds, I saw the thin green stems pushing through the soil, small and unassuming, yet absolutely alive. I knelt beside them without touching, just watching, and for the first time in what felt like months, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own home. I felt rooted. That afternoon, I opened my laptop again, not for court documents or bills, but for work. Real work. The kind I had once loved. I hadn't taken a design project in over a year, not since Liam's second cardiac episode. I had turned down a gallery lighting commission in Santa Fe. I had walked away from a museum curation job in Denver. I had told myself it was temporary, that I'd return when the world felt stable again. But the truth was, I had started shrinking long before his diagnosis. I just didn't realize how small I had let myself become until I finally sat at the kitchen table with a blank proposal screen open and no fear in my chest. The first project was small. A widow named Nancy had found my name through an old contact list and asked if I'd help her redesign her kitchen. Nothing big, she said over the phone. Just something that doesn't feel like his anymore. I understood immediately. She didn't need modernity. She needed space, breathing room, a kitchen that didn't echo every time she reached for a mug he used to hold. I said yes without hesitation. I didn't tell her what I had been through. I didn't need to. I just listened, took notes, and offered to meet the following week. Then came a young couple in Lafayette building a sunroom for orchids. Then an older man who wanted to repaint his daughter's bedroom after she left for college, and the silence became unbearable. One by one. These strangers walked into my calendar and handed me pieces of their transitions without knowing how much I was healing, just by helping them carry it. I worked with a quiet rhythm. I showed up on time, took detailed measurements, and offered simple advice that always included one personal detail: a light that turned warmer at night, a switch hidden near a bookcase, or a soft rug beneath cold tile because memory travels through feet too. I didn't advertise. I didn't update my website. Word spread the way healing does, slowly, steadily, without shouting, and with every sketch, every swatch, every small reveal. I found myself growing in parallel with the garden outside. The marigolds had begun to spread. A second row of rosemary lined the back fence, and on quiet evenings, I would sit under the maple tree in Liam's old flannel and let the sun fall against my shoulders like something earned rather than given. One Saturday morning, a letter arrived, regular mail. No threats, no demand. Just a white envelope addressed in careful cursive I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a check from the funeral home, an overpayment refund from a detail I had forgotten to finalize. Attached was a short card with only one sentence: "You handled everything with grace." No signature, no return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Clara's. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. I didn't wonder what it meant. I just placed the card inside the back pocket of Liam's gardening notebook, between the page labeled "One Day" and a pressed marigold I had saved from the first bloom. It didn't change anything. It didn't erase the trespassing, the courtroom, the note under my door, or the mornings spent with my breath held behind a curtain. But it was something, and sometimes something is enough. That evening, I watered the garden slowly, moving from plant to plant like someone finally learning how to tend herself. The house behind me no longer felt like a prize I had to defend. It felt like a home again, not because I had reclaimed it through paperwork or courtroom rulings, but because I had re-entered it fully, on my terms, without apology. By early summer, the marigolds were in full bloom. From the back fence to the corner by the porch, they spread like light stubborn, vivid, unapologetically bright. They looked almost surreal against the soft sage walls I had painted in the guest room, the same room where Marianne once stayed, where she used to leave the windows closed and the air stale. I had repainted every corner of the house by then, Not out of bitterness, not to erase, just to reclaim. Every brushstroke was a quiet correction, not of history, but of presence. The hallway now held new photos ones Liam had taken on our weekend hikes, and one of our dog when he was still young and clumsy. There were no family portraits of the Grays, no relics of obligation. The rooms felt clearer, not empty, just honest. I never heard from Marianne again. No more letters, no parked car across the street, no accidental run-ins at the co-op she used to frequent. Whether it was the court order, the silence I returned to her, or the way she watched Clara walk away during the funeral, I didn't know. But whatever thread she once tugged to keep herself relevant had snapped, quietly and permanently. I didn't need to declare anything. Her absence said it all. She no longer haunted this space. She no longer occupied my energy. She had become a chapter, not a character. But even with her gone, I found myself waiting for something I couldn't name. Not confrontation, not trouble, just a flicker of old habits. The kind that make you flinch at shadows long after the lights are back on. Some days, I'd catch myself listening for footsteps that never came. Other times, I'd find my hand hovering near the front door lock, double-checking even though I already knew it was secure. Healing, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with celebration. It creeps in slowly, over coffee brewed without dread, over emails answered without fear, over soil turned for no reason other than you want to see something grow. One morning, I found another note, not in the mailbox, not taped to the door. It was in the garden, partially tucked beneath a small stone near the marigolds. Folded once, plain paper, no envelope. My hands didn't tremble when I opened it. I wasn't even surprised. 6 words again, the same as before. This house will always be mine. The font was different, bolder this time, like she wanted it to land harder, but it didn't. I didn't even feel anger. I just read it, stood quietly for a moment, then turned and walked inside. I brewed tea with cinnamon and honey, the way Liam used to say grief needed sweetness, when the water boiled. I placed the note beside the compost bin, tore it into small pieces, and let it go without ceremony. That was her echo, not mine. Later that day, I returned to the garden with Liam's notebook. I flipped to the page where he had once written, "One day, when you're ready." I smiled, not because I was finally ready, but because I no longer waited for permission to be. I had rebuilt this life not to prove anything to them, but because they had tried to erase me and failed. They had underestimated the quiet ways I kept this house afloat, the silent forms of contribution that don't show up on paper but hold everything together when others fall apart. They thought I would disappear once Liam did. Instead, I planted something, and it grew. That evening, as the wind moved through the chimes Liam once hung from the maple tree, I sat on the bench beneath it and let the noise settle around me like an old friend. I didn't think about Marianne. I didn't think about courtrooms or closing arguments. I thought about Liam's hands, how they always smelled like cedar and wire. I thought about how he used to tap his finger twice on the edge of a mug when he was trying to solve a problem. And I thought about how, even at the end, he knew, somewhere in him, he must have known who I was. That's why he signed the refinance. That's why he left the seed packet. That's why he wrote the line I would need before I even asked for it. "You don't win by surviving," I whispered out loud, voice barely rising over the rustle of leaves. "You win by living like they never broke you." The heat came early that summer, and with it, a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The air smelled like lemon blossoms and freshly turned soil, and the house had finally settled into itself, like a body exhaling after holding tension too long. I moved through it without caution now. I left windows open past dusk. I played music from Liam's old speakers. I baked bread without wondering who might knock or what name might appear in a certified envelope. I didn't need court documents anymore. I didn't need to rehearse conversations or memorize timelines. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was mine. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and almost didn't recognize myself, not because I looked different, but because I looked whole, not guarded, not waiting, not someone proving anything, just someone living. I had a client coming over the next morning, a woman recently separated who wanted to turn her basement into a ceramic studio. She said she didn't know where to start. I told her she already had by calling. That's the part no one talks about. Starting doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in small choices, like repainting a room or changing a curtain or planting something for the first time in years. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and opened Liam's garden journal again. The pressed marigold still held its color, bright orange with edges beginning to brown. I traced the writing under it lightly with my thumb. The way you touch memory without letting it pull you under. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat with it. A truth held without rush. After a while, I walked outside barefoot and stood under the maple tree. The bench was warm from the sun. I sat with both feet on the ground, hands on my lap, eyes on the sky just turning gold at the edges. The wind moved through the chimes above me. I listened to them carefully. Not for a message, not for a sign, just for the sound of something honest ringing through the air. I thought about everything that had happened, the courtroom, the funeral, the early mornings with the engine off across the street, the letter in the dirt, the words she wanted to leave imprinted on the house. This house will always be mine. I thought about that sentence again and again, and I realized it wasn't about ownership. It was about refusal, about control, about someone who could never build something herself. So she made it her mission to take what someone else had grown. But what she didn't understand was that a house isn't just wood and paperwork. A house becomes yours when you refuse to leave yourself behind in it. And I never did. I had kept the quiet parts, the marigolds, the hallway echo, the softness of the rug Liam picked even though it didn't match. Those weren't for show, they were roots. And roots are what survive storms, lawsuits, and even grief. So I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to post anything, I didn't need revenge, because the door locks from the inside now, because I can sit at this table, in this kitchen, and drink coffee without feeling like I have to defend my right to exist. Later that night, I wrote a letter I never intended to send, not to Marianne, not to Clara, just to the version of me who once stood outside her own home, holding a key that no longer fit, while someone else rearranged the life she built. I wrote, "You didn't fail. You were erased, but you found your voice, and you used it." Then I folded the note, tucked it between the pages of the notebook, and left it there, not as a chapter to revisit, as a page turned. The next morning, I made tea with cinnamon again. I watered the garden before the heat got too sharp. I opened my laptop and prepared a lighting plan for the ceramic studio. The woman had asked for something soft, something that didn't cast harsh shadows. I understood that request deeply. When people try to take your light, sometimes the best way to respond is to redesign where it shines. And so the house remained mine, not because I fought for it, but because I stopped letting them define what it meant to belong. Because I stayed, because I rebuilt, because I never once asked for their permission to exist in the life I made. And now I wonder, how many people out there are still standing in front of a locked door, thinking they have nothing left when in truth, they've been holding the blueprint all along? What would happen if you stopped waiting to be let back in and started rebuilding from where you stand?